correspondent Yousra. Yousra, there is a marked shift change in the mood on the streets, a sense of a return to what we've seen earlier in the week.
I mean, it just shows the persistence of these protests. These aren't tied to a single concession, a single bill. This is about general discontent. And the fact that the bill has been withdrawn, the president says, though it still needs to go back to Parliament. And people are still out on the streets, they're still angry. They see up ahead, tear gas has just been fired at them. And they're facing it head on. There's a fearlessness that is pretty astonishing. There's a sense of complete disregard, really, to William Ruto, their president, standing in front of them and saying, I concede. They're not having it. And I think that does come after the deaths we saw earlier this week. The killings by the police has really made people feel like they're betrayed. There's a lot of rage. There's also a lot of courage. And people aren't willing to stand down right when they feel like they finally have the government's ear and the world is watching.
These are new live images being brought to you from the capital of Kenya, Nairobi. You can see there protesters on the streets, what looks to be water cannon as well in the distance. We've seen that tear gas. You can see the smoky haze beyond those traffic lights. We're hearing from our Africa correspondent, Yousra Elbagir. And Yousra, where does this go, do you think? How do the government, how does the President William Ruto try and respond further to these protests?
I think William Ruto went from being incredibly threatening, telling the army that this is a turning point in how they deal with threats. It was a very hostile turn. He said the protest movement was hijacked by criminals. And then less than 20 hours later, he says, I concede, I've heard you, and we're going to create national dialogue with young people. And I think instead of getting people to stand down, it's made young people here realize that we have power, we have a voice, we can get the president to change his position, and now we have a lot more to ask for, and they're doing that. These are people who are suffering from rising cost of living, young people who have struggled to find jobs. And when William Ruto was campaigning to be elected in 2022, he promised young people in particular that he would manage to get them the jobs that they need. And he hasn't. And this is now a reckoning, I think, to those promises that were made that weren't fulfilled. You'll see a lot of these guys are young men, many of them struggling to find jobs. One of them told us, get me a job, let me work with you. There's a lot of anguish and a lot of spare time, and it just goes to show why people are willing to risk their lives, why people are willing to face the state apparatus head on. It's tear gas for them, they kick the canister back and they keep it going.
We're bringing you live coverage from Nairobi in Kenya following several days now of protests against the government of the President William Ruto. You can see there protesters throwing what looked to be a stone in the direction of potentially security forces. An awful lot of anger and discontent following police opening fire on Tuesday and killing at least 22 people in the chaos that existed following the proposition of that finance bill, which would have seen tax hikes. You can see there protesters, what looks to be a rope in that individual's hands, a stone there that's being put into it, potential makeshift sling that is being used as police respond with tear gas in this instance, although we'd seen live shots being used in previous days as well. And as Yousra is saying there, this is not just a protest movement against the one bill, but against the fortunes and future that many young people in Kenya perceive. And that's important to note, isn't it, Yousra, that this is not necessarily an opposition-led protest movement, but one of a young youth movement instead.